All right. Well, you know, it's amazing, but it's true. It's Tuesday, and we're the Trampled Underfoot podcast show with your hosts, Mark Lindsay and
Oh, not that
Eloy
guy.
Escajedo.
He's cool.
What's that?
You said Mark Lindsay. I said, oh, not that guy. Then you said Eloy Escovedo. I said, oh, yeah, he's cool.
Yeah, that
No,
Mark
not that
Lindsay
guy.
guy out in the West.
Yeah.
We communicate via
hmm
or
Yeah.
our modern equivalent of.
Well, we lost power yesterday, so I don't. We weren't feeling all that modern. We were sitting out in the front yard under our ash tree with the gate open because with the gate closed, it was blocking all the breeze. And it was like 90 degrees. And we're sitting out there in the shade under this ash tree going, dang, I ain't done this since I was 12 years old.
I have a correction to make,
Oh, okay.
and it was from last week's conversation,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a silly little thing, but I made an error on the fly, and I repeated it, and you didn't even question it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not trying to lay this on your shoulders,
Yeah.
but you didn't question it. I said it because for some reason, well, I'm trapped in the paradigm of it,
Mm-hmm.
but you didn't even question it, and you could have picked it up, but you went with it just as a natural thing. I told you last week in our
Mm-hmm.
conversations when
Okay.
we were talking about Miami, um, linguistic issues and such.
Yeah.
If you recall, like the Spanish and the English, and this, okay.
Sure.
And then I told you, oh, growing up, my grandmother, when we would drive by the furniture store,
Mm-hmm.
she'd say, "Oh, look, Furnituri Waterhouse."
Mm-hmm.
And I told you with such confidence and emphasis, I told you. But Mark, I realized later on in life when I read it for myself because I was so little that the store wasn't called Furnituri Waterhouse. It was called Furniture Waterhouse
I wondered about that, but I figured, nah, maybe that's what it's called. Maybe Waterhouse was the name of the people that ran it.
because Waterhouse is a surname.
It is.
And so I'm trapped so much into the paradigm of it
Mm-hmm.
that even I screw it up because of that early on. It's actually, you see what I'm saying? So it's actually Furniture Warehouse.
Yeah. Okay.
That's
I
the
wondered
proper
if
name.
that's what it was.
But I saw it on replay and I said, oh, obviously I am so caught in that paradigm of the linguistical variation of that thing. And then you didn't stop me. So it kind of confirmed. Um, and
Well,
I
I
was,
didn't know the name of the place, and like I said, I thought Waterhouse. Maybe that is the surname, so maybe that's the name of the people that owned it. You know,
because it fits as well, right?
hmm
It
I
could
would
be,
have said Waterhouse Furniture, but that's not my store, so you know.
well, you're right there. It should be Waterhouse Furniture if that were the case.
Yeah.
But when I reviewed and I
hmm
saw that error, it's a
hmm
natural error, whatever. But
Sure.
I saw your face in the review, and you were just going with the conversation as
hmm
holistically
Yeah.
uh, in terms of what. But I said, "Is it that Mark?" And I'm glad that you said now. No, I thought about that at the time, but I just let it go. But when I was reviewing it, I said, "Is it that Mark just accepted it as is?"
Mhm.
Because it does sound like a thing.
Sure.
Furniture Waterhouse. Okay, well, that's something, but it's not correct. But at the same time, I thought, was he thinking that it's no? Wouldn't that be Furniture Warehouse? And I was thinking, so I'm glad that I asked you because now you said that it did cross your mind.
It
It's a
did, but
silly
you
thing.
said it twice, and I thought, okay, well, yeah, then he's sure. All right, maybe that's the name of the
Yeah,
company.
because I'm stuck in the paradigm
Mhm.
of the little vocality thing of the speech pattern, and I just go with it. So I'm liable to do it again and again and again in a continuous basis.
I was watching a British TV show, and the guy was talking about his Hungarian grandfather who couldn't say pineapple. He called it pinopli. And, uh, you know, finally they just got him to just Just say it in Hungarian.
Yeah.
We know what you're talking about. The rest of the world has no clue.
Yeah. I
Pinopli.
mean, there's some strange names, or not strange, but like within, like when I'm doing research, that are honest to goodness sounding English or British broadly,
Hmm.
in locations that I look in, be it Cuba or the Canary Islands. And although that was the case that they did go
Hmm.
and settle and such, in some cases it's not to do necessarily with England or the British Isles in general.
Hmm.
It's more to do with the Normans. So
Okay.
there's people that in the Spanish world that are carrying over
Mm.
Norman names, that would throw anybody today, a Spanish person, and yet they
Hmm.
have, this Northwestern European name, and it's because of that. Just an aside that I throw
Yeah.
out, but they'll Spanishize it.
Hmm.
So all of a sudden, actually, there's one from Ireland which is Culligan,
Hmm.
and they've adapted it throughout the
Hmm.
centuries, or in the past 200 centuries, so that it's now something like Colgang or something like that. But
Hmm.
it originates from their ancestor that did the
Yeah.
migration,
Yeah.
and you wouldn't attach the two
Hmm.
unless you stumbled upon, oh well, that's why.
And and it's fun to sometimes go back because I have something like that similar in my family. It's fun to go back and see the how that evolved. Like
Oh yeah.
my great grandmother, her maiden name was Tetherow. Well, tracing that name back, turns out it came from Northern Italian, and the name was Detero.
Terrible.
And it got anglicized a couple of times. It went from Detero to Detero to Tetherow, and just changed spelling and everything else. But
Yeah.
again, back in the day, most of these folks couldn't read or write, so you know, you go with what you know or what you're told.
There's a
So,
very, I've told you before, there's a very Irish name.
mhm.
Very Irish up until it's not.
Mhm.
There were Italians. Well,
Yeah.
it's funny how that works. There were
Mhm.
Italians at some point in time. I mean, the stories, there's various people that, because there's like
Mhm.
dozens and dozens of people in Ireland that have this surname.
Mhm.
And so, they have this history. So you can find like exactly why. So I'm just telling you the broad thing. But at some point, a Costello
Mhm.
immigrated to Ireland
Mhm.
and set up shop there, and they just continued to produce and reproduce. I'm sorry, and so now there's a Costello that you would read, and they have a coat of arms and everything, and you would read it, and you would think that Costello is obviously a Italian, which is Castillo.
Mhm.
It's actually, in Spanish it would be Castillo,
Which is
um,
castle, isn't it?
which is castle.
Mhm.
But in but the ones that went to Ireland, basically it became actually it stayed Costello, and whatever, it just goes on. But so stuff like that is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
had no idea when I stumbled.
And it can take various different routes too. Have you ever met anybody with the last name Folks, but it's Folkes? Two
No.
small F's, not a capital F in there at all. That came about through printing when they went from the flourishing hand printing. The way they wrote a capital F, it looked like two small F's. It was very easy to mistake it. And then as printing came into being, it was taken down to two small F's. So you have Ffolkes. And that's it's not a super common surname, but it is a surname, especially over in the UK. You'll
I
find it.
have, so one of my great great grandmothers,
Hmm.
She was either Italian. She was married to an Italian, and she herself was either Italian or from somewhere.
Hmm.
And the from somewhere that I suspect originally,
Hmm.
although my cousins wouldn't necessarily say so, but I mean, I'm the one that mostly studies this and judging from the cousin matching and looking around and sifting through, but it's nothing concrete. So I can't even tell you that, hey, this is what it is. I'm just saying
Hmm.
my suspicion is that there could be something going on in the Azores.
Hmm.
And then likewise, parallel, there could be something going with Louisiana. The surname is Foche.
Hmm.
Foche.
Okay.
But there's a name like that that's French,
Hmm.
except instead of an F, it's a P. Now I have high French DNA results.
Hmm.
For some reason or other, they've never really changed. I always keep getting French. Now, I don't know, I have no clue about in my mind, I have in my history that I've been no one ever the only my father and my grandfather and grandmother had a store called the France,
Hmm.
but they never suggest, and they lived with us here next door and I grew up with them. There was never any inkling of anything to do with anything French other
Hmm.
than that the store was called, and I never asked. But the point is, and my father never said, nobody. So I have no idea why I have French, whatever, results, whatever. And it's high. It's like my third down or
Yeah.
whatnot. So it's significant. It means that somebody in relative recent time would have been or would
Hmm.
have had something. I don't know. So people from France, from Canada to France, I'm sorry, from France. I said from France to Canada to Louisiana carried the poach or poche,
Hmm.
however they would pronounce it in their language,
Hmm.
surname. And I have matches with that. But
Yeah.
here's the screwed up part. And I think that there's something to do with that. But here's the screwed up part, Mark, that that a lot of these people
Hmm.
show up on my paternal and or my maternal side either way. So people in Louisiana,
Hmm.
even though I have the kind of they appear in both my sides. So I have a very strong Louisiana something going on due to the historical movements,
Hmm.
and because of that, I can't frickin' without I can't hone in on it because it's three generations back, like past my past my grandma, one generation past my grandmother or two. So it's kind of different or difficult to hone it in, but it's weird because it's poach, and my second great grandmother was foch a.
Hmm.
Is the e silent? Is it written for Cuban consumption? Is it just that name without? I don't know.
Well,
And nobody ever said anything about it.
depending on whether they consider the name to be masculine or feminine in France, it would be posh. That E would not be pronounced. So it would be posh. Push.
Because the thing
Um,
is that these people migrated. Go ahead. Go ahead.
but the other thing to get involved with here, and this is weird, is the great fricative shift,
The who?
where the great fricative shift,
Okay.
where we kind of switched all of our P's. We switched from F's to P's. Like the German word for pepper is Pfeffer.
Okay.
We shifted that F to a P. And we did that with a lot of Germanic words. Pfennig became penny
Was
and
that
things of
due
that
to
nature.
the French influence?
That partially due to the French influence, but also various other. The English language has gone through so many different changes, and things have come in and come out in much the same way that most of the Brits don't pronounce the R as an R. They say more of a ah. You know, we kind of dropped the P and, or kind of dropped the F and just called it a P. because it was easier to get going. You know, uh, it was easier to roll off the tongue.
One time, uh, years ago,
Hmm.
I was actually I began to study Hebrew
Hmm.
because I'm like that. I don't know why. I was a teenager practically,
Yeah.
and I got the thing that I want to learn Hebrew because not only because I was watching a bunch of documentaries back in DVD or back in cassette tape era,
Mhm.
and I was totally into it. I said, "Man, there's secrets here." I bought myself a Greek, ancient Greek, whatnot, or
Hmm.
written in Greek, plus a Hebrew,
Hmm.
and so I was studying and this and that, and I was investigating, and I was figuring it out and trying to learn how to. I just got into it for some
Oh,
reason. I just was into learning the history and wanting to know how they would have read whatnot.
yeah,
And
it's almost like deciphering a secret code.
it's so you know what's so much easier?
Mm.
Just reading it in English.
Yes, it is. I
You
mean,
want to know something? Just reading it in English, it's like it flows like a little river, like a lazy river that eases into it. All the secrets are revealed just by reading. But
you
I, for some reason, thought it was, and there's people that study that kind of stuff.
uh you want to
It's just
play with your brain, get into a word processor and type out your name, then highlight it, and then switch the font over to a Cyrillic font as if you were in Russia, and then try to read it. It'll mess your head up, man. It really will. B's
you
or
know what
R's and C's or
that
S's, and I mean,
that
it
is a
just
good. I like that. I'm gonna type in just because you said that. I have never. I don't think I've tried that. I'm gonna instead of just typing my name, I'm gonna type
Mhm.
in my name is so and so, and then I'm gonna do the translate to
Mhm.
see how they would. I've never tried that. That is
Mhm.
a pretty cool. But let me tell you the thing. So I was learning some stuff
Mhm.
on my own,
Yeah.
and so I went to church that one weekend,
Mhm.
and there was this lady there and stuff, and we were just shooting the breeze, and I told her, "Oh yeah, and I've been, I've been reading, I've been studying Hebrew."
Mhm.
And these letters are pronounced like this and this, and I gave her an explanation of what I've been studying,
Mhm.
and she's looking at and I'm telling her like what I'm learning and stuff, and she innocently, like with no ill, she looked up to me and she said, "So then it's pronounced Shanika." i, I had said that it was a sh sound because that's what I was studying, and
Mhm.
I looked at her, and as I looked at her and she said that innocently, the reflection back into my mind, I said, "No, that's wrong. I'm so wrong. It's not even right. I've been studying this, and I thought I was going one way, but
Mhm.
it was taking my butt in a whole different journey." And so I realized at that moment that what I was studying,
Mhm.
the conclusions that I was reaching, because remember, this is back before
Sure.
any of the, I was just with the book.
Mhm.
So imagine how many errors can occur. It just, so
Oh
that's why
yeah.
guidance is important. So, anyways, long story short, that
Yeah.
yeah,
No,
it's
it's
just one thing.
Hanukkah.
She looked up at me. She said, "So, it's pronounced Shanuka instead of Hanukkah?"
Mhm.
And I was like, and like my light bulb immediately. I said,
Mhm.
"No, I'm wrong." And I looked at her and I smiled, but inside I was just like crumbling.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
My whole study was for naught.
Uh, well, no, not for naught. I mean, did you go back and kind of figure it out later
When that
on?
happened, if I recall well, I had the books,
Hmm.
but I felt that this was quite the hill or mountain to climb
Hmm.
without proper. And in fact, um, with enough time, you start to break the ice and get through.
Yeah.
But I kind of weighed my stuff as the investment that this is going to take
Hmm.
as a kid. So I just opted for not.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, now Larry, who goes by the name Henry Scrollsaw, I don't know why, but his name is Larry. He asked a question up here. How would you trace something like your last name? For me, the way I figured this out is going back through the records, finding her parents and then their parents and then their parents. And eventually it led back to northern Italy. And I saw how it changed, how that name changed. It doesn't work for everybody, but between marriage certificates and christening records and things of that nature, you can see how a name would change.
Yeah.
So,
Originally, I guess my answer to that would be that originally there was a point at which, if you look at the world in our modern time, there's a there's a, I guess you could call it a colloquial, or what's the word, secular
mhm,
concept of it, of our modern 20th century type understanding that we all
right.
share. We all share just out the gates because of
Mhm,
media and such. We have some brackets, end brackets to what surnames are. But
mhm,
delving past that, and by the way, that window is today, and I would comfortably push us into the 1800s and
yeah.
even further. But let's say what I consider our modern times in the terms of this, how you go about with last names. I consider exceptions excluded. There's
Mhm,
always exceptions to the rule, but broadly, my window of modern times within this category is today, and the end bracket is into the 1800s, going back.
yeah.
But it buffers. It slowly comes to a halt the further back in time you go past the 1800s, and
Right.
that could be the late 1800s, mid 1800s, or even early 1800s. Anyways, with that said,
Mhm,
there was a point at which our modern understanding of surnames, the placement of them, the handing down of it, and all the things that go along with surnames did not exist.
right.
And there was a time prior where our now reformed, if we can call it that, understanding of what English is
Mhm,
from our understanding, or what Spanish is in my
mhm,
case, for my ancestors, or French. There's a point in time in which that world that we understand, going back in time, and the usage of surnames going back in time, we're still there, but doing things that Mark was saying. But then there's a point in time going past where the world was Roman, or Europe, Africa, parts of the Middle East. The world was more of a Roman dominance with the Catholic Church of that time,
mhm.
and the traditions were different ones than we would even be able to, and so they would use names of like George from the Hill,
Yeah.
or Peter from Peter by the river,
Mhm,
or Peter the son of
right.
Edgar, and instead of something concretely like we use.
Right.
So to finalize it, the solidification of our surnames occurs, or has occurred, in our modern time through that long journey,
Mhm,
because of the church insisting upon a unification of names
yes.
along the way.
Yeah.
And this is prior to when the church, when different countries or when different countries in Europe separated from the Catholic Church,
Right.
there was a cohesiveness in certain ways where, people would take on names and stuff, but that varied too, region to
Right.
region, village to,
And they were subject to change.
and
And
they were subject to change.
for instance, if you go back through my um, if you go back through my ancestry, Lindsay, and you and I have talked about this behind the scenes, is a corruption, a English corruption of a Scots Gaelic word meaning from Lincoln. As it turns out, my ancestors, their last name was de Ghent, and Ghent is a place in what is now Belgium and Luxembourg. It was called Ghent back then. We're talking about the 800s and 900s. And then Gilbert de Ghent went to the Great Britain and settled in Lincoln and was there for, well, until his death. And his son came along. He was Walter de Ghent. Then he there was a bunch of political squabbling back and forth, and he was forced to flee England into Scotland, where he became known as William from Lincoln. But in Scots Gaelic, it was another word that became Lindsay.
Yeah.
So the names were subject to change, and it was Walter Day Lindsay, and then he just dropped the day from and just went with Walter Lindsay.
Yeah.
And it's been that way ever since.
The addition of, for instance, de Escojedo.
Mm-hmm.
I have documentation of de Escojedo. So not everybody, because it varied and it depended. It depended on factors that may have been of importance,
Mm-hmm.
and it depended on factors that had nothing to do with of importance, and
Yeah.
anything in between. It could have been just a scribe that was writing it and the formalities of the time.
Sure.
But the use of they or de
Mm-hmm.
is, which is basically a Latin, this is Latin
Mm-hmm.
purely, is like
Mm-hmm.
saying of Lindsay
Mm-hmm.
or of Escojedo.
Okay.
I pause in case.
1 second here. Let me go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. So the they or the Lindsay or the Escojedo or the Marcus or the whatever was just an adage saying like John of Lindsay, which is what Mark was explaining. And that was used frequently across Europe in
Mm-hmm.
different variations.
Yeah.
In documents, sometimes, like for me, I'll see up in my tree that they'll say De Ortega.
Mm-hmm.
But the name itself is not De Ortega. Although people will keep it in the trees just for the hell of it because it's nice, you see it.
It sounds cool.
But it's just really Ortega
Yeah.
as an example.
The Germans have another form of that. The Germans have a variation on that. It's von. Like you'll see Baron von Richthofen. It just means this baron is from Richthofen. In the Dutch, I believe it's Vom, V-O-M, but I could be wrong. So it exists in several languages.
And then things started to but actually, what's interesting too is that I've run into the case already.
Mm-hmm.
But we're talking up there, like we're
Mm-hmm.
talking going into the 1600s.
Right.
So we're not talking about like yesterday or 100
Mm-hmm.
or 200 years ago, but
Right.
way back when. There were situations where, and I've mentioned this before, but it's worth restating, that you'd have a mom and dad, a couple, and they proceed to have, as they did in many cases in many cases, 12 kids.
Yeah.
But what ends up happening in cases that I can actually bring forward is that now they have 12 kids. Some are female, some are male, but in that lineup of like 12 kids, you'll have 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 of them that have the father's surname,
Mm-hmm.
and then you'll have the rest that have the mother's surname, and yet they're siblings. And sometimes you'll have males that will forego, because this is how they were named, the father's surname and be given the mother's surname. They didn't have the same, because you and I both know you're quite happy to be, I'm assuming, I would bet money on it, and I would say the same for myself and many people out there, if not everybody, or a great degree. I'm kind of happy with my surname.
Yeah.
I kind of like it. I kind of like it because it marks me,
Mm-hmm.
it brands me
Mm-hmm.
exactly what my father, my father's father, my father's father's father, my father's, and
Mm-hmm.
I can trace it, and
Mm-hmm.
you can too. And it's sort of, hey, I'm here, but I belong to a history.
Yeah.
Okay, we like that. But back then, they had our understanding is different. So maybe you have your 12 kids and you're like, well, my great grandfather, which I met when I was little on my mother's side, was a forester
Hmm.
or a hill.
Hmm.
And in honor of him and due to the great thing that happened in that time or what,
Hmm.
you shall now be John Hill.
Hmm.
And they didn't see it as, oh, now we ruined. They could have, but I'm saying that in many cases, they, you know what I'm
Hmm.
saying? They
Yeah.
ruined. No, they just went ahead and said, this is in memory of or for lands and to continue a certain contract and such. You know,
And sometimes to break ties with a family that they didn't get along with or something like that. I mean, that happened on my mother's side. Um, my grandfather's great grandfather changed the spelling of their last name and broke ties with his entire family. And as far as I know, nobody knows anything about the real family, where he came from. It's just a dead end because he severed all ties, left the state, and this was back in the mid 1800s. So I'm betting it was over the Civil War, but I don't know that for a fact. But
it's a weird. So for in my case, it's a weird thing, especially doing the Y-DNA.
mhm,
Number one, it's weird for me because I'm like the only one that I'm aware of the family. Well, actually, I'm the only one of a few as far as males.
mhm,
I'm the only. Maybe no, there's that's not true. There's two more male Escajedos in Miami-Dade County, and
mhm,
then in the United States,
yeah,
and they're my cousins, um, older than I. So it's kind of like uncles, but they're cousins. Um, I don't know that they've taken any. They would pop up, but going back in time and looking at those matches of the Y DNA, that's a direct paternal line.
mhm,
They've become from that one ancestor in the past that nobody knows. It's just a number.
yeah,
They branched into people in the British Isles that and everywhere. But I'm using one example of the British Isles that have specific surnames. I'd have to look up at the one, but there's one that repeats. So
mhm,
there's a bunch of and here in America and they're in England, there's a bunch of people that they wouldn't be Escajedos and I wouldn't be what they are in terms of the surname, but we have the same blood
yeah,
through a direct paternal line. And they're absolutely British
mhm,
and I'm absolutely Spanish, absolutely as absolutely can be,
sure,
within reason. So
yeah,
my point is that you, now you have this fork in the road
right,
out of how many who knows. So
yeah,
we're all just cousins.
yeah, yeah,
But the surname thing is something that came so much later, and branch and family branches just continue that
mhm.
it just so But I like my surname.
And every culture had their own way of handling it. I mean, in Iceland, you would be Eloy Eloyson because your
Yeah.
father's name was Eloy as well.
Mhm.
And if you had a sister, she would be whatever Drusilla Eloy daughter, Dottir, and they carried those names through their whole life. They didn't change name. No, you didn't take upon another name when you got married.
Yeah.
You just became the son or daughter. And
Yeah, that's for sure.
that's where we got names like Johnson and Williamson and Thomason and Magnuson and things like that. So,
Yeah, well, it's repeated in Spanish too, and in Southern
mhm,
Europe, and I can see a lot of it in Italy when I have browsed through there,
yeah,
where they do something similar.
hmm,
So they have Smith,
hmm,
and they have the variations, all the
hmm,
variations, but with the
hmm,
Spanish, and I'm sure that Portuguese does as well.
yeah.
It's very confusing though with the languages.
Well,
It really
yeah,
is.
it can be. You would, for instance, be in English. It was also quite common to take on the name of your occupation, And that's where Smith came from. You know, think of blacksmith, leathersmith, wordsmith, you know, silversmith, things of that nature. You worked with your hands and you created things, you know, oh, it's Jim the Smith. And then it just became Jim Smith, you know.
Yeah.
And so that's why we have names like Baker and Weaver. And it's also in other languages. Weber is German for weaver. You know, all kinds of different cases like that. You know, if you weren't named after a person, you were named after a place or a thing. Hence the definition of a noun: a person, place,
Yeah.
or thing.
At some point, the church, and this went across Europe,
Mm-hmm.
prior to they said we must. What's the word? We must. I'm paraphrasing the whole thing. I haven't looked at this in a while,
Mm-hmm.
but they wanted to maintain a standard where father and son and child and mother and daughter, everything had a consistency. So
Yeah.
they pushed for consistency,
Right.
and there was a nudge in that direction. But people were in some cases. I'm not saying there was no hard fast rule. Let's put it
Mm-hmm.
that way. There were some rules, but there was a lot of different ones. But in some cases, people just went about naming their children the way the hell they felt like
Yeah.
they wanted to name them, and that's the end of it. And
Yeah.
so that happened.
Yeah.
And so now that's why we have people that might have DNA tests, because you see this a lot, and like you'll say, well, how the heck am I related to um a
Ortega.
person living up in Michigan like myself?
Yeah.
Like I'll have people up in Michigan all of a sudden. I'm
Didn't
like,
you
well,
have one in Russia one time?
I have them in. The mixing is so savage and so continuous and so thorough. The
Mhm.
mixing is so thorough, and I'm not speaking for anybody else, although I could make the argument easy, but just for me,
Mhm.
the places where the DNA that I have is shared across this world
Mhm.
to whatever degree is
Literally across the world.
inconceivably
Mhm.
vast.
Yeah.
It just is, and it's provable. Like the matches are there and the segments are there.
Yep.
Um, so how the hell that works? It works because
People go
smaller
all over the
groups
place. Yep.
smaller groups became bigger groups, and they spread that stuff around. And it's very even for me, even now, because when you look at your cousin matches, like, what the heck? I mean, I have them in Scandinavia,
Mhm.
I have them in Brazil,
Mhm.
I have them in Italy, Israel,
Mhm.
with official. I have people that have written in Hebrew their names.
Mhm.
Does that mean that I'm wait a second, does that mean now that I'm have Jewish connections? Yeah, I have some Jewish connections at some point.
Yeah.
Do I have connections in Russia? Yeah, at some point, somebody, somehow, in some fashion or another,
Mhm.
something, this and that, and now I have a connection with Russian people. Be it that I don't have Russian directly, or maybe they don't
Right.
have Spanish directly, or whatever the mixture there. Somebody
Yeah.
is our common ancestor.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like,
And
so
when you figure all the wars and all the movement back and forth and the settling here and then moving on, and the
yeah,
nomadic lifestyles and what have you, and then throw the Mongol hordes in there for good measure. I mean, DNA went everywhere. It spread like peanut butter.
yeah, and definitely, if the Y-DNA that they explain is true, and I have no reason to, I mean, they can further it along, but the trajectory is true for mine,
Mhm.
which is the R1B.
Uh-huh.
Those people are direct fathers so long ago. They ended up in that, what do you call it? Even though it wasn't during the Mongol invasion era,
Hmm.
but they were there in
Hmm.
that area. They set up shop in that area.
Hmm.
So,
And got busy.
well, yeah, they got busy, and so it's freaking fantastic. But as far as surnames,
Hmm.
None of that happened. Obviously, we know up until you know roughly
Well,
within the last, I guess, if I had to say, I would say within the last 3, 4, 5, 600 years. That's when an inkling of the standards started to head in the right direction, cloudy. But in
mhm.
the last 200 to 300 years, we have something that's so similar to what we know now that we can sort of point to it.
Yeah.
And definitely within the last century and a half, we know exactly how it works.
Well,
But
in the Great Britain, it really wasn't all that important. It wasn't seen as important until about the 10 to 1100s, when it became a question of passing down land from father to son. And this kind of coincided with the printing of the Doomsday Book, which was basically a not quite a census, but very close. It was a census of all the landholders, and it became important for standardization of a surname so that they could ensure the correct line of succession when it came to passing down land and property. That was mainly for the nobility, but then it became the same for the commoners as well, for leases and things of that nature, to make sure that they were passed down to the correct people legally. And so it was in the 10 to 1100s that that really occurred over in England anyway. I got a correction to make myself here. um, Linda corrected me. The female side in like Iceland was named after the female's mother. The male child was named after the father, and the females were named after the mother. Okay,
okay.
got it. All right,
Um,
I got it.
well, so before Spain was Spain, it was vast, various, I guess we can call them keeps,
Hmm.
holdings,
Right.
villages, hamlets, territories in the possession of warlords
Hmm.
that were of that region, of that locale. And they would take hold of a village and populate it.
Hmm.
Just generationally, they'd have their offspring, and their top people would have their offspring, and it would just populate the village. And whoever controlled at the time, I don't know the. It's called the Beatrias. The Beatrias. I forget what era it was. I have it downloaded, and my surname appears in it.
Hmm.
I couldn't trace It's from the same area that my grandparents come from, my and great grandparents, but I couldn't make that connection because we're talking about
Well, not
hundreds and
yet.
hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years ago. But the name was floating around, anyways. Um, and what the king of that era did was he did something similar of what you're saying, and people were sent out to make sure to identify what each lord of their area had, and in order to tax or not tax depending on the status and such. And it's all written there with the names of who founded such said village or whatnot. So there's something similar. So, but it was all for the purposes of that you said,
Hmm.
because you need to make money in order to
Hmm.
have soldiers to produce,
Right.
fighting forces to win the day and such. And so they were doing that way back when.
Yeah.
They needed money way back when.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely.
But they all and they fought with each other too, by the way.
Oh, all the time.
Two villages could be completely at odds with each other, and it just it was what it was. So unification, like a country of like what we know today in Europe, that was long time coming. That wasn't, out the gates. People were just simply like, I'm from this village and this is my people and we speak this way.
Mhm.
And even though you're in the, like in my case, the Iberian Peninsula in Spain, no, those people over there, Yeah, there's similarities there, but we're our people here.
Yeah, they say they're A's this way, and we don't say then A like that, you know.
Yeah, and maybe the river is closer to our area, so don't you? You better give us something in return, like all sorts of stuff like that.
Yeah,
Um, so that progressed, but we don't have access to detailed stuff,
no,
unfortunately, from that era like we
no.
do from recent times.
For many, many years, well, hell, for centuries, for eons, in fact, it was not really seemed as important. You know, it wasn't like society today where it's common for the kids to grow up, leave the nest, branch out on their own, and start their own family someplace else. And that someplace else may be across town, it may be right next door, it may be 7 states away. That was not common at all. There were exceptions, obviously, because people did move around and people did go places. But it was more common to basically stay there within the area. If you had a farm or a ranch or something like that, it was expected you were going to take over that farm or that ranch. And from the time you were born to the time you were an adult, you were raised with that in mind. So, you know, it was common for a family to be, for instance, in the area, Cantabria, where your family comes from. That was the norm to stay there for hundreds of years.
Yeah,
And
they that's just where they were from, and that's just all that it was.
exactly, it was only with the as technology advanced and it became possible to get on a ship and go someplace else that became really even a possibility. So, and that's
But if you think of,
relatively recent
well,
in
yeah,
the grand scheme of things.
well, okay, so it's a difficult subject, and we've
Mhm.
butted on this in the past because I tend more towards more travel and you towards less, if you recall. But that all depends on the era we're talking about, because we're talking
Yes,
about a long scoop of history. But
right.
I would say that I guess it depends on the time scale and all
Yes.
this and that. But I would say that it is known, or they have um, evidence of through DNA that,
Mhm.
and this is just one case in the, but it's an important case. When the people came in to Western Europe that were R1B,
Mhm.
um, there were already people living in what is Western Europe
Right.
um, prior, but these people come in about 5,000 years ago, and this is all
Mhm.
documented stuff, and they can show why they that is. I mean, with plentiful they come in and they proceed to basically mate with the women.
Mhm.
But along that journey, they would exchange. So women from one place
Mhm.
would all of a sudden appear in a totally different part of Europe.
Yeah.
And sometimes the case was with men.
Mhm.
But so there was a lot of, so in a sense, there was a lot of movement.
Yes.
In the Bronze Age, there was an extravagant amount of movement.
Mhm.
It doesn't mean that locals, a percentage were moving around and a percentage were not.
Right.
So there was two things happening at the same time.
And I was talking more or less after the Roman Empire, after the fall of the Roman Empire. So, you know, especially when it comes to your family in Cantabria, that I was talking mainly after the fall of the Roman Empire, because during Roman occupation of a lot of these different countries, you may just be more or less dragooned into the military and you didn't know where the heck you were going to end up.
Well,
So,
when the Romans fell
mhm.
and everybody was left, like England or the British Isles were left to
Mhm.
its own devices,
Right.
supposedly, and in Spain too,
Mhm.
supposedly, and it sounds reasonable, but this is just a broad statement. Many of the soldiers just basically stayed,
Yeah.
while others
Some did. Yeah.
took off because it was all about the money. The money flow ended, and everything, and support ended, and
Mhm.
so you had all these people in places like today's England
Mhm.
and today's Spain or Portugal and so on and so forth. You had all these outposts and cities and towns built by Romans,
Mhm.
sometimes on top of or adjacent to even older settlements from the
Right.
people that were there prior to them.
Mhm.
And these people incorporated into the populations to the degree that they did, where they took on wives of the area and vice versa, like just all these combinations
Sure.
of things. And so you had that. So the Romans spread across Europe, and there was a little bit of shuffling the cards in, or not a little bit, a significant amount.
Mhm.
But I don't know that. I know there's plenty of information on it, but I've not gone into that because that's another area. But
Sure.
I do know that general sense that they explain.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you had things that were like movement, but you had people that were stationary.
Right. Absolutely.
And so when people, the ones that did move,
Mm.
they did interact with the people that stayed, and they injected new family lines into that.
Mhm.
And in that whole mixing up of stuff is how come today, if somebody takes a DNA test and they see their cousin matches, there's all sorts of stuff going on that make no sense in a 20th century manner, but make total sense if you just think of history of human beings
And
doing
the
whatever.
migrations, yeah.
Right. So, but in my case, is I'm not a solitary case, but dude, I mean, they're everywhere, and I mean, it's like, what the heck, dude? The
Yeah.
only thing I don't have is Far East stuff. Like, let's say, but when I mean Far East, I'm talking about going into Asia,
Mhm.
and I have a few
Mhm.
because the Spanish were in the Philippines, so
Yes.
there's that too.
And
But
they
I
were
don't
in
have
Japan for a little while, but Japan was a closed society, and they were there for like I want to say 40 years. And eventually everybody was kicked out except for the Portuguese. They were allowed one little town that they could trade.
the Dutch
Mhm.
as an example is a strange occurrence, which I just been made aware of a little bit more in detail than I understood, just a little bit more. The Dutch, it turns out, we've talked slightly about this in the past.
Mhm.
It's not like, but the Dutch, because I get people that have Dutch connections. Why?
Mhm.
Well, I don't know why specifically, so I can't tell you specifically because we're talking who knows how long. But I do know that the Jews settled in that Netherland area.
Mhm.
And I do know that they came from mainly Spain and
Mhm.
Portugal. So when they were kicked out by the Spanish in the 1400, late 1400, 1492 onward,
Yeah.
and the Spanish said convert or exit, many of them went to North Africa.
Mhm.
Of the Jews, they went to North Africa.
Mhm.
Some went to the Canary Islands. I can attest to that one.
Mhm.
Others went to the Indies, the West Indies,
Mhm.
and settled in little towns and little islands.
Yes.
Others went straight into Mexico. Others went into New Amsterdam, into New York, today's New York. And these were either Spanish or Portuguese Jews.
Mhm.
But many of them went to the safe harbor for them of the Netherlands and Amsterdam specifically,
Mhm.
and they created a whole little society there,
Yeah.
which can be researched online, like their books.
Mhm.
So they do have their names there and all their information.
Modern day Poland as well.
Um, so they set up shop there. During that time, in that era, the Dutch were revolting, or no, I'm sorry, that's after. In 100 years' time, roughly, more or less, the Dutch began to revolt against the Spanish that had possession
Mhm.
of that territory. And but there were Spanish people going there too, and Portuguese, be it Jewish or non-Jewish. So you had people getting together in ways that one would not understand
Mhm.
from a 20th century, but it's there and it's
Yeah.
true.
Yeah.
So no wonder,
Yeah.
no
Well,
wonder. that the results, when one looks at DNA results and such, you have cousin matches from Timbuktu and beyond.
Yeah, we're all mutts. We're all
It's
mutts, man.
it's an incredible
Mhm.
opening up the water, the floodgates of,
It's a
like,
hell of a ride. It's a hell of a ride, I'll tell you that. You know, it
yeah,
it really is. It's a hell of a ride.
yeah, it totally is. It totally is. But anyways, on that front,
Now,
do you have another topic within this,
I,
or?
I I have a question for you. You're a musician, and yes, I'm going to relate this to music. Sorry, Steve. You're a musician. Now you know what Melody Maker is, right?
It's
The
a
mag
magazine.
the magazine, yeah. Okay. In 1967, this week in 1967, an ad was run in the back of Melody Maker magazine. Now, let's see if you would answer this ad. Okay. Wanted freaky lead guitarist, bass player, and drummer wanted for a new group. Also, any other astral flyers, like with cars amplification and that which never grows in window boxes, phone Wimbledon 0697.
What year?
1967. Would you answer that ad?
No,
They want a freaky lead guitarist, bass player, and drummer for a new group. You wouldn't answer that ad.
I wouldn't answer. I answered like less than 1% of ads in my time, anyhow. So I
Okay.
probably wouldn't have.
Okay. That ad was placed by Mark Bolan, and he was forming a band called Tyrannosaurus Rex.
It's one of my favorites. I collected a bunch of, after the fact,
Mhm,
obviously, because it's not my time. Um, a bunch of his albums
mhm,
as T Rex, and I
mhm.
had one Tyrannosaurus Rex album
Yeah.
where it's him on acoustic, and it's a great album.
Uh, they formed the band, and they called themselves Tyrannosaurus Rex, and they released 4 underground folk albums. Then they reconfigured themselves and became T Rex, and became the T Rex that you know.
Yeah,
So you
yeah.
wouldn't
Mark
answer.
Bolton.
You wouldn't have answered that ad, huh?
No, I wouldn't have answered it because it makes no sense to me. At least in this moment now, it makes no sense to me. If it would have said something to the effect of we love blues,
Mhm,
um, I'll tell you what automatically will spark my on an ad as a
mhm.
guitarist. We're totally into blues, and we like rock. We like a mixture of blues and rock. We like to write our own songs, and we're open to writing and collaborating. We like recording music, stuff like that. I would jump on, and our favorite bands are Jimi Hendrix, you know, Led Zeppelin. We like Eric Clapton, BB King, and Stevie Ray Vaughan, and all
Yeah.
that. If they would say that, I'm like, ring, ring, ring. If
Well,
it
yeah,
were
but
that,
you're looking at it from a 2024 point of view. So
yeah.
you don't think you were a freaky lead guitarist? No. Okay. All right.
No, I don't consider. I never consider. I liked I liked the blues. I really
Mhm.
I liked the blues because I understood it. I
Okay.
understood it. It felt accessible to me. And I
Okay.
like the heavy metal stuff, but for playing it, I like the blues, man. I like the blues. I like that.
Yeah. I mean, I'm
Honestly, that's the key.
I'm with you.
That's the
I
key to the highway.
said it before and I'll say it again. Jazz and blues had a got together and had a baby, and they named it rock and roll. So
Rock and roll and rap music didn't have no babies, but they kind of sort of did, and they called it hip hop.
mhm, yeah, you know, but Um,
Wait, what's that music that you hate? Disco and that crap that came after that was quite plasticky had a baby and it's horrific and it destroyed music forever.
it was a dark time in American music history. I mean, that's probably, I hesitate to call it the worst thing that ever happened in the 70s, but on the popular culture front, it was one of them.
You know
You
what the
know,
one the worst of the worst of the worst is in sometime in the beginning of the 2000s was this thing called new metal, but it was NU.
Mhm,
It just, I think it was NU. I don't know because I didn't pay that much attention at all to it. But
mhm,
anything that happened in that era,
mhm,
unless it was key select bands
mhm.
that are acceptable because they harken back to the 60s,
Yeah.
I'm not. If it's not the 60s, if it's not the 60s, 70s, 80s, and some 90s as leftovers, I'm not. I'm not interested much. I like the
Well,
prior
the-
50s and so on, and
well,
that's fine. But I don't like the new stuff.
it just depends on who's releasing it. You know, like if ZZ Top came out with a new album, I'd check it out. I'd probably end up owning it. You know, AC/DC released a new album a couple years ago, and from everything I've heard from it, it sounds like a pretty good album. I don't have it yet.
But why isn't the magic there like Back in Black? Why is it that when you grab Black, or anytime I have in the past, why is it, Mr. Mark Lindsay?
Mhm.
And maybe you don't feel the same thing, but I'm so bold.
Mhm.
I am gonna be so out there and
Hit me
just
with your best shot.
I'm gonna throw caution to the wind. I'm just gonna tell you
Mhm.
what I think, and I'm gonna include you in it. And I'm being bold here, but you correct me. Why is it when you grab a Back in Black cassette,
Mhm.
whatever, and you pop that mother love bone into that freaking cassette player in your car? Why is it that you know there's something, and you tell me if you don't have this inside you, then we're gonna have a hard knock discussion here. But there's a feeling that the rock lives, and I'm not even joking. I'm not pretending. Maybe I'm programmed. Obviously I'm programmed, but there's something that says, "And the rock shall now commence." There's a feeling
Yeah,
that frickin' ACDC's on, and we're gonna rock this mother down the
but
highway. I feel that.
there are a lot of albums that do that to me.
No, but I'm
But
giving
yeah,
you.
AC Back in Black was one of those albums because, and not to take anything away from Bon Scott, all right? Not to
Oh no,
take
he kicked
anything
ass.
away from him at all. But when you put that on, it didn't assault your ears.
No,
It donkey punched you right in the center of the forehead.
she was a fast machine.
It
She
just,
got the
whoa,
motor
what the
teeth.
hell is that?
Dude, it was like it was. Yeah, that's right. Those jeans are ripped. What are you gonna do about it?
Exactly. And so that was just, it was one of those whoa moments.
Yeah, dude, freaking bad to the
So,
bone.
but nothing had been heard like that. You know, Brian Johnson's voice took them to a different level. They were here with Bon Scott and not
Oh
taking
no,
a thing away from
no,
him.
they kicked ass.
But Brian Johnson's voice just phew, shot him through the stratosphere.
No, that album, when that album came. And by the way, the
Mhm,
way I just remember, I was younger,
mhm.
so I was listening to what the older kids were listening through their friends, which were my younger. Like, we were the younger kids. We got the scraps off the table.
Yeah.
When my friend came and said, "Dude, let's sit and listen to this,"
Hmm.
and he showed me the album, and it was black
Hmm.
with the ACDC on it.
Hmm.
It was almost going somewhere that mom and dad said not
Yeah.
to go.
Yes. You were
And
doing something you weren't supposed to be doing. Yes.
yeah, and so like he 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 placed it in the thing, and we sat on the hood of the car. Literally, dude, it was freaking. Take a snapshot. It's a freaking movie.
Hmm.
And when I heard that music rocking on that little walk,
Da-da-dum,
dude,
da-da-dum.
it was over.
Yep.
All I needed to see or listen to was that.
Hmm.
Between that, Ozzy Osbourne, dude, Ozzy Osbourne, although people say this and that and whatever, he's gone through the mill and back, but dude, back in the early '80s, as little kids hanging around, the older brothers allowing for an Ozzy cassette to be placed in our hands,
Hmm.
and us like with the booger hanging, and we're listening to it. That was important to us
Yeah.
because it meant it was the key. We don't know what
Well,
the key to what, but it was awesome.
as far as Ozzy is concerned, we were the same way with Black Sabbath when they came on the scene. It was that this is the stuff that your mom and dad wouldn't want you playing.
Yeah.
So there was a little bit of a this is mine kind of a thing, you know, and maybe I need to keep this record stashed away back in the middle of the pack where I know mom's not going to go dig it. She didn't care about my records anyway, so long as I had the headphones on.
My dad used to say, "I like Elvis Presley."
Yeah.
Oh, but he wouldn't listen to Elvis Presley. I mean, he would hear it probably back in
Mhm.
Cuba, but or something like that. But whenever confronted with all this musical
Mhm.
assault of rock and roll, he was like, "Oh, in my time, I was more into." And this was like 30 years after Elvis Presley, or after the 50s,
Mhm.
50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. Yeah, 30 years after and that's crazy. Um, so we were actually adjacent to that era anyhow, even though we were far removed. My dad would say, no, no, son, we used to listen to Elvis Presley. I like Elvis Presley. And he'd walk away because I had this whole mess going on with freaking heavy metal and such, and he wasn't having it.
Yeah.
He'd allow it, mom
Mhm.
would allow it, but
Well, you were talking that feeling of the rock is still alive. Rock will
that's,
now begin.
yes, we shall not mess.
I got that from a couple of Creedence Clearwater records when I was like 7 years old.
Okay.
It's just like, holy cow, this is different. They're talking to me, you know. This isn't. I know Dad bought the record, but this isn't Dad music, you know.
Let me pause you. You just said something
Mhm.
that could be a throwaway in anybody's, but it is important. And it's an obvious one. You said, but they were talking to me.
Mhm.
That makes a difference.
Yeah,
When you can relate to what you're listening to, all bets are
I,
off.
I
And
couldn't.
that,
I couldn't really relate because, as I said, it was like 7 or 8 years old. Dad bought the record for the song Willie and the Poor Boys. Dad didn't care nothing about Green River or Born on the Bayou, or he liked Proud Mary, but he didn't care nothing about Ramblin' Man or any of the other harder songs. So he was one of those guys that he'd play the song, then he'd pick up the needle and he'd move it over to the next song. That wasn't me. I dropped it on there and I listened to the whole damn album. I got so something like Fortunate Son. No, I was too young. It wasn't. They weren't talking to me, but I felt like they were playing the music that I wanted to hear, and I didn't even know I needed to hear it.
well, that's the point.
You know.
That's a good elaboration of it. It doesn't necessarily mean that you understand the, you know,
Mhm.
messaging because I didn't. There's a lot of songs they're talking about all sorts of things, considering
Yeah.
love or any number of political or whatever combination of stuff. But it's the overall accessibility that you can relate to that allows you in that you feel that you agree with, which is what happened with me listening to the Beatles 100%.
Yeah.
I didn't understand what the heck Mother Superior jumped the gun.
Yeah.
Mother Superior
Or
jumped
even
the gun.
Strawberry Fields Forever. I mean, there was nothing I could relate to in any of that. I know what I liked, and I know I liked the sound. But and to me, Abbey Road is still one of the absolute greatest albums that have ever been put out.
But that accessibility, that I could relate to, or
Right.
that I felt that they were playing or singing or speaking to me
To me.
in a broad sense,
Mm-hmm.
in a very specific. It's a heartstring being plucked,
Yeah.
where you resonate with what's coming
Mm-hmm.
out of the speaker to the degree that you may not understand what a song actually, but it's the vibe that draws you in,
Yes.
and you say, yeah, this works for me.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
And but especially as young kids, we tend to personalize things. And yes, they're singing for me. They're playing this for me. This is my kind of music. Keep your blood, sweat, and tears. Keep Bobby Vinton singing Blue Velvet. That's great. This is mine. You know.
I like, there's a good thing which I always bring back up to, amongst everything. And there's this Americana thread that's difficult to grab and hold and be able to transfer, because it's so many different little things
Mhm.
at the same time, like little snapshot eras or moments in time
Mhm.
that comprise an American experience.
Yeah.
I sound like a PBS special.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, but it's the truth. I mean, it is the case.
yeah, there's something going on where
Mhm.
somewhere there between cowboy hats, dirt roads, just people playing music, things that, because you said this one time too. So, and I'm paraphrasing you, but you said something to, and sometimes you don't even. It's not like you've experienced it yourself, but it's part of. You said something to that effect, and when I wish I could file it and bring it
I
forth, but
wish I could remember it too because it sounds cool.
yeah, we were talking about something similar, and I can just barely grab it from the ether and
Mhm.
drag it in. But you said something to the effect of that many times a lot of these snapshots and such are something that you may not have experienced, but you know that they belong. You said something
Yeah.
to that effect, and I was like, yeah, that's exactly it. And I feel that that's the case. So anything like Clearwater, and down on the corner,
Mhm.
out in the street, just all these little things. Uh, Um, I was down on the corner, but in my mind, but in reality, I was down in the corner in Sweetwater, and these people were talking about some other situation, and I could
Yeah.
picture it. I could picture something where stoops are at and stuff. I could picture a world, and that imagination, freaking awesome, dude, freaking
Well,
awesome.
where I went with Down on the Corner was San Francisco, the Haight Ashbury district, because the song is about a band busking on a corner. Bring your nickel, tap your feet. I can picture that in my brain. I can picture dudes sitting there playing with the guitar case open in front of them. It's right there in my brain. I
You
only
don't need
saw it
any.
as I only saw it as we drove by, but I knew what they were talking about.
I
I,
could picture. Do you remember that song? And I don't know if this is something. I think this is something. So like and I bring Steve into this. And by the way, Steve disappeared for a time period today, and 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 then finally he answers, and then you disappeared, and then everybody was disappearing. So I felt like I was in some sort of vortex of the
it was
Twilight Zone.
all a conspiracy to make you doubt your own existence.
Yeah, I was like, whoa, like nobody's around now. And so, in any event, I think it happened. It happened in succession. But um, isn't it true? I don't know. I can't speak for, but like Steve says, or when we've talked in the past about things, that he likes books
Mhm.
and he likes reading books, and he's cool with the that it allows you to imagine
Mhm.
according to the things that you're reading,
Mhm.
the imagery that you put into place,
Mhm.
which is something for some reason that I've had trouble with, or I don't enjoy as much when it comes to books. I like to read actual things that have happened, and
Mhm.
then I feel comfortable or I enjoy that. When
Mhm.
it's abstract, I like to create abstract. I don't
Well,
like to read about it abstract for some reason.
if I said something like sitting on the tailgate of a pickup in a forest full of trees, just sitting on the tailgate looking out, and you're in a forest. That's going to conjure a different image to you than it does to me, because I've
Absolutely.
done that. And where you sitting up in the pilot seat on an airboat, me saying that, you can conjure an image because you've done that, and I can't. I've never had that perspective. So I'm forced to kind of, I don't know how tall it is, but I can kind of imagine it's, up off of the deck, and anybody in the front of the boat is going to be down below my level. I don't know if I can talk over this thing or not, but I don't. So I have to kind of imagine it. And sometimes that's half of the fun of the story.
No, I get you, but like, there's two categories: fiction, nonfiction.
Mhm.
And the thing about, so I'll give you an example, as opposed to fiction, where everything is, you're creating it along the way.
Mhm.
I read, if not all, I don't recall now, most of a book about Jesse James, I think it was.
Mhm.
It's been a while. And it had to do with his life, and that he was killed.
Mhm.
He was shot in the back and stuff. I think he was trying to fix something. He got up on a, I can't recall exactly, so I'm really paraphrasing, but he was up on a chair, or he had walked into a kitchen. It was a situation. All those details, I don't know exactly how that kitchen and that homestead where he came back to his family.
Mhm.
I think he was hiding out. I can't remember quite. And there was a bounty on this. There was all these circumstances occurring. But the thing is that, even though those things I have to conjure in my head, and I did, like, I could almost see the mosquito screen before the door, and I could envision all that stuff.
Mhm.
But it was anchored in real life accounting,
Mhm.
at least through the memory of the person that wrote the book, um, of what occurred. And so it anchors the whole book in my, for my liking, in enough stability, as opposed to start reading a Star Wars book.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's the my issue, one of my issues,
Well,
you know.
if you can relate to the setting, or you can relate to the sensations, I mean, you've obviously been out on boats in the ocean, right? Even just a little bit offshore.
Man, I can't remember. Maybe a little bit offshore. I just can't remember.
But
And I live in Florida, but I can't remember.
so can you kind of picture a sea adventure,
I can
on
picture a
a
sea
ship
adventure.
at sea and what have you?
Yeah,
Yeah. So we do have experiences that kind of help us out with things like that.
yeah,
But yeah, when you're talking about science fiction fantasy, you have to suspend belief on so many things that a lot of people have a hard time even getting into it, because it's like, well, wait a minute. Now he's got three heads. What the hell's going on here? And some, it's just not for everybody. And I do get it. I do understand that. But to me, a lot of that is part of the fun. You were talking about things in nonfiction. Even seeing photographs doesn't do the real thing justice, as I'm sure you know. I mean, you can show me pictures of the Everglades all day long, but there, you're not getting the sounds, you're not getting the smells, you're not getting the feelings, the temperature, the humidity, all that kind of thing. There is so much missing.
yeah.
When we were stationed over in Germany, we went to the Eagle's Nest, the tea house up above Berchtesgaden,
Mhm.
that was built for good old Adolf. And I can remember seeing photos of it.
What a way to describe him. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, everybody knows who he is, and the less he's mentioned, the better. But I have seen pictures taken from a certain angle. And when we went there, I wanted to go see if I could, maybe not stand on that exact spot, but go find that angle where they took that picture. And it turns out you go out on a little balcony and you walk up this hill. It's nothing but rock. and you're standing up not quite at the top of the hill looking down at it, and it was all fog, you know. We were in the clouds basically, and it was all misty and everything else, and I'm standing there and I just got a shiver because of the fog. It looked like a black and white photo even though I was standing right there. It was like, it was one of the weirdest feelings I had
Do you have
ever
that picture?
experienced. Huh?
Do you have that picture?
Somewhere, yeah. I did
Wow.
take that photo, and we've got the photo in a book that we bought while we were over there. I've got that picture somewhere, and it looked like a black and white photo, and it was a weird feeling because it's like, damn, it looks just like that picture, but I'm right here. This is it. I'm not looking at a photo. It's right there. So I don't know when the picture was taken, but it was kind of a freaky feeling because I was seeing it in real life, you know. It was odd. I mean, there was a lot of strange things over there to me, you know.
This has nothing to do, but since we're in Europe now again, I'll just say I got to share this with you. It's a little bit weird. So um, there's a site that is adjacent to the standard DNA sites. But what this site does is that it compiles all the ancient samples,
Yeah.
and then they test you against them to see what pops up, who you match with.
Hmm.
And then the segment. So if something is too ancient,
Hmm.
like let's say it's a Illyrian, which is a Mesopotamian area, um, or Balkan area, sort of broad type of person.
Hmm.
They ended up invading and attacking, or were attacked, vice versa, against the Romans, and they were taken over by the Romans and became part of the like it just
Yeah.
they're in that area. So you may have a percentage that's significant with one guy like that of
Hmm.
the bones, but so do most people, or a significant amount of people around the world,
Yeah.
especially with European ancestry, but not necessarily only
Yeah.
because it's so darn long ago
Hmm.
that that one guy belongs to a family that spread that same DNA that he
Yeah.
had to other people that eventually spread out to other parts of Europe and the
Hmm.
world and so on and so forth. So now people around the world will show this one guy as having a chunk of DNA with
Hmm.
you, and you're like, holy smokes, I'm Illyrian.
Hmm.
And people will start saying stuff like that. And they're like, no, you're not Illyrian. If you go back in time, you share
Yeah.
populations that spread out through, and it's just how it works. But anyways, I have a connection with a guy called Christopher Corvinus
Okay.
from the Hyundai dynasty. He was the son of the ruler king
Hmm.
in Hungary, or I'm sorry, in Hungary. They control, and they came from the Vlad Count Dracula.
Hmm.
So there's two of them that I match
Hmm.
with a lot of, and
Other.
these people are from that Eastern Europe, sort of
Yeah.
that area, and I match significant amount, a significant that when
Hmm.
you see it, you're like, holy smokes,
Yeah.
it's a large chunk. Um, this Christopher Corvinus was born and died as a child, so he was buried with his family member. They pulled his bones, they extracted the thing, and well, I'm not the only one
Yeah.
that shares his DNA. He's shared by Europeans across the way,
Hmm.
and he's from Hungary. This child.
Yeah.
Um, and by the way, they blended it. They blended that those families married with other people in Europe, and the Spanish rulers and those rulers married together, and those rulers had children,
Hmm.
and those children were no longer rulers. They were just children
Yeah.
that married other people in Spain or in other parts of Europe. And so, but anyways, the point is that I could easily say to myself, it might be true, but or to a degree, But if everybody shares it, you know, or many people share it, um, it's not specific to me necessarily, but there's a specific link somehow.
Yeah.
Um, and this is Christopher Corvinus, and they connect with Dracula, Vlad the Impaler.
Mhm.
I thought that was freaking pretty cool, but I can't go on and say, oh well, hey, there is a connection, but it's not to the degree that I
He's
just
your grandpa.
exactly. But I just think that that one
Mm,
is cool because, well, I mean, it's pretty macabre actually because
yeah.
he didn't do it.
Mhm.
It was Vlad the Impaler guy, but just the same, it's part of the same freaking family.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's some crazy
Well,
stuff.
it's funny you bring up Jesse James. He was a cousin. So,
You did mention that.
yeah.
Did you ever read his biography or the book?
No, not really. I never really researched him all that much. I did find the connection. It was down a maternal line.
That
So,
is cool.
but Steve here, he said, I take 1 half day off and everyone freaks out. I think it was more of the case of you took a half day off and then I forgot to post the promo. So Eloy didn't know if his internet was out or what because we both disappeared. It was
I was
just,
a bit confused because all things came to a head at the same time,
yeah.
and it's funny how we get very accustomed to the routine of. So like if I
Hmm.
reach out to you, I reach out to Steve, I reach out that we know, like we're all connected in the ways that we are,
Hmm.
and you may think that it's just um, a not coincidental thing, but just
Hmm.
an average thing. But in a way, it is
Yeah.
um, our form of sitting around the park playing dominoes.
Hmm. Yeah,
It's
it is. In
it's
many
our
ways, it is.
yeah, it's our 2024 sitting around the park and playing dominoes
Yeah, in
and
many ways.
and drinking Cuban coffee.
Well, I got American coffee. You wouldn't drink a cup of Cuban coffee that size.
No, that would be bad.
Well, you can do anything once.
Yeah.
So, no, I was out getting my spoil board set up finally. I had some time, so I took it and did it. So,
Yeah,
um,
I'm used to
yep.
your like
It's usually right around 3 to 3:30. I do it.
yeah, I don't time it. Like I'm not
Mhm.
sitting there with a stopwatch saying, "Okay,
Mhm.
Mark, within this window is going."
Yeah.
But there's a sense,
Hmm.
some sort of barometer,
Uh,
and if that's shaken up,
yeah.
I'm like, "Wait a second,
Something's going on here. Yeah.
something ain't right around here." And so that's kind of like, yeah,
Well, I mean, there have been times that you've gone to the grocery store or something like that, and you won't set up the podcast until 4:30 my time, for instance. And I'm like, well, is something go on? Did he go to sleep? Is what's going on? Because it's usually right around 3 o'clock he posts it. And I get kind of nervous, get kind of, you kind of, and then I see it pop up. I'm like, okay, he's all right. So
yeah,
it's
because
too
it's
early to call, but then again, it's a little bit out of place.
well, this was pressing the window,
Yeah,
the time window.
it was around 5:30. So yeah, my time when you called. So
Yeah,
that's
so I
cool.
was a little
Yeah,
bit,
see, we did the old fashioned way. He picked up his phone, he dialed my number, and he called me. So we're old school like that.
it felt weird, but I had to do it. I had no choice. It's such an odd way of communicating.
Oh,
How can
okay.
you talk to somebody if you can't see them in high definition?
Mhm. Steve says he was rebuilding a computer he smoked, but he had to stop to be here. I just go out and buy a new one. Then I tear into it. So Linda gets the next new computer. I got a new computer about a month ago, so she gets a new computer next.
Um,
Yeah,
this
I
is
said it in public.
and now it's a done deal.
Yeah.
This is another aside, but
Mhm.
I found it interesting. It's a little bit, but I like comic book. So we were talking about how.
Mhm.
Bear with me because this is actually quite a little twist. At least for me, I don't. But I like nonfiction
Mhm.
when reading books, but I like fiction when there's pictures, if there's pictures to go along with it, like comic books, I find it the perfect coming together for my purposes, and I grew up on it anyhow.
You're not one of those people that calls them a graphic novel, do you?
They have graphic novels.
Well, I know they do, but I mean, you're not one of those people that calls comic books a graphic novel, are
No, graphic novels, the difference between the graphic novels and the comic books is that the graphic novels, they'll take a whole series of comic books and bind them into one book
you?
and sell it as a kind of like a
Yeah,
sequential.
the whole chronology. Yeah.
So it makes sense in that sense. I mean,
Mhm.
they're not trying to be uppity necessarily.
Right.
In that context, it makes sense. But this is what I saw that I couldn't believe. A guy on YouTube, and there's a few people now I discovered doing it. A guy on YouTube took a whole comic book,
Mhm.
the one that I had that got damaged, unfortunately. It was such an awesome, like I had such a collection, dude. It was so thrilling for me. It all went water damaged after a storm and flood. But in any event, this guy took a comic book, transferred it to images,
Mhm.
and produced the Reddit,
Mhm.
but Reddit acting out all the parts with the noises and clicks and bangs and
Mhm.
trees and whatnot and wind,
Mhm.
converged it all into a wonderful episode. And I could not believe when I sat there because it brought everything that I loved.
Was it
From
was it animated, or did you just add soundtrack to it, or what?
so he would take the panels, like let's say
Mhm.
page one, and he'd slowly be sliding it down
Mhm.
so you get to see the thing. But he would read so by the time he'd read the next thing, it would show up on the panel,
Mhm.
and it's just enough so you can enjoy the journey.
Mhm.
But you're listening to it enacted like old timey radio,
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah.
dude. It was so fan. Let's put it this way: I do not comment on stuff like that. On this one, I said, dude, you have brought forth. Like I gave some nerdy. I
Mhm.
said, what you have. Like I gave some nerdy Lord of the Rings. You have brought us forth a great a great awakening in the ancient ways of the comic books. Like I did this whole thing because it's so everything that I enjoyed as a kid.
Mhm.
Um, just super well done, dude. I loved it. Nerd stuff, but whatever.
No, I mean, we all nerd out on our own things. I mean, you brought up an interesting point there talking about like the old time radio. Do you listen to any real old time radio
I have.
you have in the past? Is that
Yeah,
something that you're into? Because
I like it.
that's it's like the audio book version of reading.
I like it.
Yeah, I do too. I really dig that stuff a lot. And that's one of those things that I've never experienced. I mean, I've not experienced sitting in the living room with the whole family huddled around the radio listening to The Shadow Knows or something like that. But I can relate to it. I don't know how, but something inside, if I'm, sitting back in my chair and got the lights off and I'm listening to an old time radio show, I can relate to that feeling. I don't know what it felt like, but I can relate to it.
Yeah, it's the same reason that I can. I think because our parents and grandparents, particularly our grandparents,
Mhm.
that was kind of the standard.
Mhm. Yeah, it was. It absolutely was.
My grandfather was born in 1911.
Yeah.
So, I mean, TV came about in the 1940s.
Yeah, the late 40s. My dad said that it was like 1952 or 53 when they got their first TV. And he was born in 44. So he grew up listening to the radio. And
That's
then when the TV came on, the whole family, you shut up and dad's watching TV. I paid this much money for this ding dong thing. You bet I'm going to watch it. And that's what he did. So, and if you didn't want to watch this TV show, go to your room. And that's what dad would do and turn on his radio.
radio
So,
was very, very important to my family that
mhm.
immigrated here. And as exiles.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I don't know. I, I don't think anybody under the age of
40.
25 really understands how important radio was to all of us.
Yeah.
That was how you, I mean, from the time I was like 13 years old, 12, 13, something like that, until I got married and moved out, that was my communication with the world. Sitting down and watching TV seemed old fogey to me. That's what old people did. Was they sat around and watched TV. No, I'm in my car. I'm off doing something. I may just be parked up on a hilltop looking out over the valley listening to the radio. But I wasn't sitting on a couch in front of that damn TV. I'm out being, doing something with somebody.
But they were doing that because it was just a natural extension of sitting in front of the radio. It's just that now they have images, which is way better in
But
their minds.
but the radio was background. Remember I was talking about just a few minutes ago, I talked about that scene sitting on the tailgate of a pickup in a forest, both doors open and the radio's playing, and you're talking to somebody sitting on the other side of the tailgate. Maybe my brother, maybe my cousin, maybe my girlfriend. It doesn't, whatever.
Um, my after on weekends here at home, my grandparents living here and we were living next door. Um, my grandmother would prepare lunchtime,
Mm-hmm.
and then she'd scream out. She'd walk out to the porch,
Mm-hmm.
and she'd say lunch.
Yeah.
Um, just like that. And then mom or dad would get up from the house
Mm-hmm.
next door. He'd get up and he'd walk. He'd have a cigarette. He'd be walking over. Then she'd be drinking coffee. And then I'd follow suit. And then we'd all converge into the house. And my
Yeah.
grandfather would be washing his hands. And grandma in the kitchen, she's setting up the putting the plates on the table and such. And we all file in and we all take our seats, and the last one always, or I'm sorry, the first one to sit down and the last one to get up and off the table was always my grandfather.
Yeah.
And my grandfather would sit at the table
Mm-hmm.
and would not touch any food
Mm-hmm.
until all people
Mm-hmm.
were seated and eating, everyone.
Yep. Yep.
And I would question him about it. He says, I wait till I'd observe him. But dad wouldn't do that. Dad would come in, he'd sit down, he'd start grabbing the bread, he'd break a piece
Mm-hmm.
of bread, he'd start going, like his engine started running right off out the gates. Grandfather had a particular way about him,
Yeah.
and I would copy him. I am in many ways, well, in certain ways, a copy because I observed him.
Mm-hmm.
I always felt he held knowledge that I needed to know because I mean he was, and he would wait.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would sit and wait, but I was so hungry
Yeah.
and he'd sit there and wait and I'd break down and I'd start eating, but the lesson was still there.
Yeah.
After we'd finish eating,
Mm-hmm.
my dad would jot back home to listen to his radio or watch TV. Mom would go over, get on the phone and whatnot. And my grandparents would sit on the couch and in the rocking chair, turn on the radio.
Mm-hmm.
She'd serve coffee. Everybody would leave after coffee. Even I would get coffee
Mm-hmm.
as a little kid. Always, all my life, coffee. That's just typical. And he would turn on the radio, and we'd listen. And I'd sit and listen to the shows. They were in Spanish,
Mm-hmm.
so these were Cuban shows and whatnot, comedies and all that. But it had the same exact function, purpose, and such.
Mm-hmm.
But it was holdover from the early 1900s in Cuba,
Sure.
being played here in Miami to the exile community. all Cuban exiles and their families, if you refer to certain things about radio,
Hmm.
will tell you in the affirmative,
Yeah.
because it's one of the cultural points, anchor
Hmm.
points, that connects the exile community.
Hmm.
And I could say that I didn't find it anything different at the time, but now looking at it, it's one of those key things. And radio was very important to those generations that came prior to the television, and they kept that tradition
Hmm.
well into my young adulthood.
Well, it was the same for, I won't say, there were many similarities with me as a teenager growing up in the San Francisco Bay Area, in that that's where I got my news from. It's something big and major. I mean, if it was just normal, regular news, I, that this station is, they've got news going, flip over to one of the other stations, you know. And that was the great part about being in the Bay Area, was there were so many stations, because we were kind of like in between San Francisco, Oakland, and San Jose down to the south. So there was a station that wasn't playing news at the top of the hour. They were playing music, either AM or FM. And that's how I discovered FM, actually, was just flipping it over. I was in our station wagon and flipped it over to FM and started scrolling through the dial and found a San Jose station, KSJO. Yeah. That was playing. I don't even remember what the heck they were playing now, but it was like, oh, wow, wait a minute. I think they were playing some Pink Floyd. But that was before they were ever thought about putting them on AM radio. And I started gravitating towards FM, album oriented rock, and getting away from the AM top 40 pop stuff,
Did
until we
AM
moved up here and there weren't any FM album oriented rock stations. And I had to go back to AM pop.
did AM ever sound good?
When you're in a 1964 Impala with one speaker in the middle of the dash, it was enough. You didn't know any better. It was only when you got into stereo and you had FM stereo with, speakers in the back and speakers in the front, that you could get the whole stereo effect from. Then you noticed how mediocre AM was. But growing up, that's all we ever had was AM radio, and the speaker was up on the dash. So, Dad, if I liked the song and I'd asked him to turn it up, he could only turn it up so much before my mother would start, "That's too loud, turn that down." You know,
One little
there were
speaker.
no speakers in the
Me,
back.
me, 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 down on the corner. Me, 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 me.
Yeah, you know.
I mean, but there was something so shrill or tinny
Hmm.
about AM, in my
Yes,
opinion.
yes.
FM is such a landscape of.
But when you have nothing to compare it to, you think that's how all music sounds, you know? And it wasn't like the car was the quietest thing in the world anyway. So you had to turn it up a little bit to hear over the engine. So, I remember riding around, and we had a 1964 Dodge Dart. I remember literally rattling around in that thing. It seems like every body panel on it had one fastener that was loose, because you go over a set of railroad tracks, and I would spin around to see did anything fall off. And so, but it was a different time, and with nothing to compare it to, that's what you thought music sounded like, until I got a set of headphones. Because with
That's
my dad working nights, even if I was playing the stereo, it had to be kind of quiet because I couldn't wake my dad up. And then he brought home a set of headphones, and I commandeered those almost immediately. And I mean, I spent countless hours sitting there in a chair in front of that big RCA stereo, that a big console stereo about 7 feet long, sitting in a chair in front of that sucker with the Woodstock soundtrack. Just,
people.
I
People
mean,
don't. People don't remember,
mhm.
but depending on how fancy they were, some of those headphones.
Oh
Because
yeah,
remember, this was back in the day but some of them had dials for volume and all sorts of stuff.
Volume, treble, bass, balance, the whole thing. Yeah.
People don't remember. I mean, many people do, but some people maybe more nowadays type um, would not know. But we had to, so those headphones obviously had to have a squiggly cord
Yeah.
um, connected to the actual device,
Hmm.
and instead of getting up and go, you had control.
Hmm.
There was all sorts of stuff like that.
Oh, yeah.
And if you remember, post that type of world that we lived in, inhabited happily, I would say, um, they were still selling headphones. And I don't know if they still do. They probably still do, but
They
they're
do.
cheap. But if you go to any drugstore or any, you know, Walgreens or any whatever,
Hmm.
they'd have whole racks
Yep.
of all varieties of headphones, from the most cheapy weepy ones
Yep.
to nice ones.
Hmm.
Um, so that if you're on the go and you just want, and as a kid, sometimes I'd break one or what, so I'd end up buying one and I'd go for the cheapest one because you wanted candy on the side, and you ended up with these crap headphones. Do you remember the ones that barely had cushion on them, that they were just like
Yeah.
a thin, crappy foam?
Yep.
It
Yep.
just it was just like one wire to
Hmm.
to arc around your
Well,
head.
Dad brought home these headphones for him. I got more use out of them than he ever did because he liked different music than my mother did. But um, I man, those things were basically formed to my head because the minute he said, "Yeah, you can use them," and these were a nice set of COS headphones. And I don't think people realize how expensive things like that were back in the day. You
Yeah.
know, I mean, I can remember my parents when they got their first color TV set was just before I moved out, um, or just before I got married. That thing cost them $300. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot, but
It
you got to
does.
remember my rent for the month for a one-bedroom house was 125.
Yeah.
So that was basically 2.5 months rent
Yeah.
for that TV set. They
Yeah.
were expensive.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that would be like paying, oh, I don't know, if you're paying 2 grand a month for rent or your mortgage, imagine paying 5 grand for a TV. And that was just a color TV. They were still selling big console 27-inch black and white units because not everybody could afford a color set.
Yeah. 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 It was.
So it was a completely different world. I mean, so if a set of headphones cost $40, that was a lot of damn money, especially when you're bringing home $90 a week.
I mean, oftentimes we would go, my friends and I, or even when I'd go because my mom was working at Jordan Marsh, and
Hmm.
maybe it was a school day, teacher's work day, or it was some sort of holiday, and she really didn't want me hanging out at home all day, and
Yeah.
so she'd say, come on, let's go," and I'd go with my mom to work,
Hmm.
and she'd say, "Just come back every now and then to know that you're okay,
Hmm.
but go explore." And the mall was such a place. Well, anyways, we would go and window shop.
Hmm.
So to offset, because there's a bunch of cool stuff in in the stores,
Yeah.
you could sure freaking truck purchase that you'd want to purchase, but there was different situations going on. I mean, regular, we were just a regular family in terms of
Hmm.
economy, in the, I guess, I hate to say lower rung, but still, I guess not even lower middle class. It was just working class.
Yeah.
Um,
That's same as us.
yeah, we were just working class, and I couldn't. They would splurge on me when it was possible,
Hmm.
but there were times where I really, we didn't have sufficient, and so I would end up just using the things that I had, and I was fine with it.
Yeah.
I had no issue
Yeah.
going
Well,
without, but I never had without to an extreme degree where I was foraging in local garbage bins and such.
No, no, it was never anything like that. We were as middle class as you can get. I mean, my dad worked, mom stayed home with us kids until I got to be about sixth grade. And then she just got bored sitting around the house all day, waiting for people to get home. So her and dad talked and she went to work. And I would come home after school. My brother went to a babysitter because my dad worked nights, so he was asleep when I got home. They knew that if my brother and I were together, we'd kill each other or wake dad up or both. So they had to, we were literally separated because we did not get along. And, um, that was when she went to work. And okay, I was always encouraged to work to do things for money. I got a small allowance for mowing the lawn and taking care of various things around the house, clean out the garage, what have you. So my dad didn't have to do that stuff.
Yeah.
But most of my money came from bagging groceries, or I worked for a dry cleaner, putting curtain hooks in curtains, or working in the back room at a donut shop, stocking shelves, things like that.
Yeah.
I was always, encouraged to do something. If I wanted, you want to go to the movies, you got to go out and earn the money. So that's what I did, and
I'm cracking up because. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead. You
well,
gonna say something?
but after I started doing that, the allowance ended because it's like, well, why should I give you $5 a week? You're still going to mow the lawn because you're still eating our groceries. But why should I give you $5 a week when you're bringing home $35 a week doing all this other stuff? I was like,
So,
Dad, come on.
I'll say that it's funny because I'm thinking of my situation.
Mhm.
So I'm I'm a I'm a I'm a regular American kid,
Mhm.
Mark Lindsay,
Mhm.
but my parents
Weren't.
were but my parents but well, here's gonna come the situation's coming. But my parents, they were exiles from Cuba. They came
Mhm.
when they were young. So when I when I approached my dad with the
Mhm.
concept of allowance,
Uh-huh.
it was quickly done away with. Like the whole idea, oh, now I got to pay you much. Like the whole concept. But what he did in order to
Mhm.
correct for that is kind of like what you ended up doing, is
Mhm.
like mow the lawn and do such X, Y, and Z.
Mhm.
And so I would get something for that. But
Yes,
but
that's what it was.
but like the concept of allowance, I picked up on like that. I was
Yeah.
just waiting for the right time to lay it on him.
Mhm.
And I said, well, now I'm kind of like getting into an age where I'm venturing further and stuff, and I'm gonna need some cash. And so I approached dad and said, Poppy, um when I'm gonna start. And I was cautious because I was afraid of the. I said, when are we gonna start? When am I gonna start getting an allowance? And he says, what? He says, get. And I think I can't recall the details, but I know that I conveyed
Mhm.
what the finer points of that interaction
Mhm.
was.
Yeah.
And he dismissed it. but
Mhm.
but we would have the. So it's funny
Mhm.
how these are one of the little drawbacks,
Mhm.
because if the plan was in action generations prior to my parents, I
Uh-huh.
would have scooped up the positive
Yeah.
situation. But that didn't. Same thing happened with things like Tooth Fairy. That was out the door.
Yeah.
I knew about the Tooth Fairy. I wanted this to occur. And Dad, if I put money, and he looked at me, for a lost tooth, no. And so little things like that is what. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I call it allowance because that's what I thought it was at the time. But it was, we had a list of chores that we had to do. And if you didn't do those chores, you didn't get paid. You know, my brother's big thing was loading and emptying the dishwasher every day and taking out the trash once a week. And I, I did the lawn front and back, rake, swept down the sidewalks and the front porch and the back sidewalk and all that other good stuff. We had chores, and I would get $5 a week, and my brother would get $3 a week. But I'm 9 years old, 10 years old.
Yeah.
$5 a week was a lot of damn money.
Now you could do a whole bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
You
And
could do a
then
whole bunch of stuff.
the first time I worked, I was trying to remember who I was working for. It was just kind of a side job type of a thing. And I helped, that was building a fence. I helped them put up fence pickets because it looked fun and I enjoyed it. And it was like 3 days, and he gave me a $20 bill. The first time I'd ever had a $20 bill of my own in my hand, I thought I was Rockefeller, man.
That was heavy duty stuff.
That
Dude.
was big money. When minimum wage is $1 an hour, $20, I mean, hell, that's half a week's work.
I would my mom would or dad would say, son, go to the store and get me a pack of cigarettes. You give me the money,
Mhm.
and here's some change. Whatever's left, you can buy whatever you want with what's left. Go and come
Mhm.
back.
Yeah.
And I'd grab it. I wouldn't say yes, no, nothing. I'd grab the money and rock and roll because
Mhm.
it was a yes every time. Because
Yeah.
I knew that the residual from that money
Uh-huh.
was all mine. And so I'd go to the store,
Mhm.
and as you very well know, they would sell you the cigarette if you
Oh
bought
yeah.
shy of probably beer, because I think that was an unspoken that I'm aware of, and I never was asked to go buy beer, but just cigarettes alone in comparison to the last 20 to 30 years of how things are
Yeah.
compared to that era, um the teller or the cash register person would
Mhm.
not question you not once or twice.
Yeah.
Your parents had no doubt that you would be back soon enough.
Yep.
Nobody would stop you along the way.
Nope.
There was no issue. And by the way, this is parents. This is back in the day, and you know it well. I know, but
Mhm.
parents sending their kid out into the streets to cross a couple of blocks to get to a store in public where maybe police officers, other adults are walking around,
Mhm.
and you're walking out with a cigarette thing, and no one
No one
bats
questioned it.
at all.
No.
That's the world.
Yeah.
That's the world.
Yeah. We did that all the time. My mom would give me $1 and send me down to the store, and I'd bring them back. I was 10.
I
Whatever.
challenged. I challenged my adultness to my dad one time.
Mhm.
It's I wish I was, but anyways, whatever. I was a rebel without a clue.
Mhm.
I just the hormones, and I don't know what it is. It's just that But
Well, you gotta.
I was hiding that I
Mhm.
was smoking,
Mhm.
and one day, in my mind, I said, "Why am I hiding that I'm smoking? I'm an adult now." I was like 18, 17, 18. I was just on the verge,
Mhm.
and so my dad, look what I did. My dad was there in the living room talking to me, and I said, "Uh huh," and I pulled out in front of my dad. Uh huh, yeah, and I pulled out a thing, and I pulled out a cigarette. Mm-hmm, yeah, and he's looking at me. And Mark, the level of criticalness
Mhm.
that was,
Yeah.
and I'm going like this. Uh huh, Poppy, yeah. And he's he said, "You're smoking now. You're smoking now," and it went downhill from there. He didn't stop me.
Mhm.
He didn't stop me, but he said something to the effect of, "I'm gonna buy you a whole pack, and you're gonna smoke it all in front." Like he did one of those
Uh-huh.
to see if he'd scare me off.
Mhm.
But he knew that I was at that age, and he grew up smoking.
Yeah.
Everybody was smoking, so it was a
Yeah.
situation where how do I get my son not to, but at the same time, can we?
I got to
And
talk him
so
out of this. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and that's how it went.
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
bold. I challenged.
I don't think I ever challenged my dad on things like that. Um I don't
No,
remember ever doing it. I'm sure. I know I made him mad. God, my eighth
was
grade
that too
started
bold,
nailed
Mark?
it.
Was
Well,
that,
I mean,
dude? It was too, dude. I
it
was
is, but I mean, I'm
shoot,
trying to
man.
remember how my parents figured out I was smoking. I don't remember how they figured it out. My mom was the one that figured it out. No, she was mad, but dad was like, "Hey, we both smoke. What are we going to say to him? I mean, he's
Well,
been brought up around it. What do you think is going to happen?"
dude, they used to drive. Okay, my dad specifically
Mm-hmm.
would say, "Okay, come on, son, let's go," and we get in the car
Yeah.
with the windows rolled up,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I'd be in the back seat or or next to him, depending on and the car would just have a cloud, and I'd be like, "Dad, please open the windows." Oh my goodness! As
Hmm.
a kid, what do you expect's gonna happen
Yeah. Exactly.
after years?
Hmm. So, yeah. I mean, I don't remember exactly how they found out, but by the time I got married, I mean, I had been smoking in front of them for a while. So,
There was a king of England during the era of exploration.
mhm.
I hate to say it. I wish I could be pinpointed, but whatever. I'm paraphrasing. It's there. It can be looked up. And he detested tobacco.
Yes, I know who you're talking about, and I want to say it was one of the Richards. Let me look. Go ahead.
He detested tobacco and wanted to ban it, put tariffs on it, this and that. But the darn product produced such great revenues. It just flowed into the coffers like nobody's business. He said it stank and it was
Mhm.
wretched and such and this and that. But why the heck did people freaking love it? Because it's freaking good
King
stuff.
King James the First in 1604. So it wasn't one of the Richards.
Okay.
So yes, he wrote a book called "The Counterblast to Tobacco," and he printed it in 1604.
You know how many outhouses had the pages of that? Because I'm sorry, dude. I mean, coffee, tobacco. Well, right there, you have a recipe for Cuban culture just with those two. If you add rice and beans, then now you've got yourself a whole freaking thing. But you can't. Coffee and tobacco are products along with sugar, obviously. That it just humanity. It is what it is, dude.
No, he called it a noxious weed. He did not make it illegal. He didn't make the sale of tobacco or the smoking of tobacco illegal, although many other European countries did. Instead, King James instituted a 4,000% tax hike on tobacco in 1604, but it still did not reduce English demand for what he called a noxious weed.
Well, they made money off of it, but that's another
Yeah,
reason a lot of
that was
people.
that was the reason they didn't make it illegal.
Well, but that's another reason. Well, apart from many other reasons, but
Mhm.
that's one reason why people hightailed it to the Americas anyhow across the
Yeah.
world. We're not talking just England and that history because
Mhm.
it's the whole history. Beyond that, but people didn't like the concept of taxation when it gets to the crossroads of burden to the extreme. They were taxing people in Europe in different places to such a degree as well that people were freaking going hungry because they
Mhm.
had to make up the sufficient amount to pay the authorities, and they didn't have sufficient for them. So a lot of people said, well, it's best we travel out, beyond and yonder, and and try our luck. So there was a lot of forces at play to get away from. It's kind of like what people do when they say, I'm going to a mountain and I'm going to make a cabin,
Yeah.
and this is kind of like what it's been going on forever, because your
Yep.
warlords and kings
Yep.
and princes, they want your money or
Yep.
your labor and your products,
Yep.
But if they take so much that you can't feed your family, well, what good the hell is that?
Yeah. Well, and then then you have the other side, like during the Highland clearances, where they kind of discovered that that wool was more profitable than any crops this tenant farmer was growing. So they've just, run them off the land, demolish the house, and run sheep on that land. You know, at one time, the UK got 2/3 of its revenue from wool. It was that high in demand, and it was that profitable. So,
It
and
just
that's where
and
a lot of people left.
yeah, there was a lot of reason, and I did tell you that one time I was reading or watching a documentary. I forget now which one, where when the British came
Mhm.
to secure the colonies because the colonies were being uppity,
Mhm.
and they started to forward into the territory
Mhm.
of the colonies. Every freaking village or little township that they come across inland,
Mhm.
the men, soldiers, were taken aback
Yeah.
because the Americans, British, but you get the point,
Yeah.
the colonists, let's say, generationally they're already 100 years in or whatever. Wait, what? How many? What? What, like 150 to 200 years, whatever the case, since the early 60s, since the first half of the 1600s in.
Mhm.
So that was quite a chunk of time.
Yeah.
Their homes were freaking
Yeah.
styling it.
Yeah.
The the
Big.
the amount of product that they had for everyday needs
Mhm.
was a world apart from what they knew in Europe. And this that they saw, and it was written in the same. I don't. I'm just paraphrasing what I heard. I'm sure that there's more dynamics to it, but I can surely tell you that something similar happened in Spain.
Mhm.
People came and prospered.
Yeah.
In Cuba, they prospered.
Mhm.
In the Americas, across the Americas, they prospered in their ways.
Mhm.
Um, and they had abundance because they were selling product that they were making and people wanted it. Just
And
it's
and when they couldn't prosper, if there was a way, they left. I mean, that was the motivation for westward expansion, was to get out of the United States and someplace where we could prosper. Now, at that time, prosper didn't mean make money and become a millionaire. It meant have land and be able to exist on your land with cattle and the fruit and vegetables you could grow and your chickens and all this other stuff. Just have land to where you could work it and you could be self sufficient. That was considered prospering.
yeah. I mean,
So, you know,
what happened in the Americas, if it's taken as a whole,
mhm,
to include what we often do not ever, and obviously I'm focused on the Spanish world
mhm,
because of the things I'm studying. But if you were to take the whole of the Americas
mhm,
and think of the impact holistically
mhm,
of what of the things that can be drawn from here at
mhm,
that time, resources, production of food and such, plus the distance away from the powers that be in
right.
combination. So people were still paying taxes, but if you're here sending money over there is different than if your little house is right down the hill from the manor.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? It's way
Yes.
different because if you're over here across an ocean,
Hmm.
you can play around with the numbers
Hmm.
and send over, enough to
Well,
keep
yeah.
them busy.
Well, not only that, but you can move out of that settlement and set up your own little area. Well, who said you could have that land? Nobody said I couldn't. It's not a part of your settlement. I'm 3 miles away from your settlement, and I'm claiming this little piece of land right here, and I'm building my house. And it may start off as one room, but depending upon, you and the size of your family, what have you, it could end up being a nice 13-room, 2-story house. I mean,
In a sense, America, and when I mean America in this scenario, I'm using the Spanish sense of the word,
mhm.
and various, where I'm taking the whole of the two
North and
continents.
South America, yeah.
I'm just saying of what we would say the Americas,
Hmm.
also alleviated in a sense. I'm thinking off the fly here, a lot of the pressures in Europe in terms of um, people trying to make a living for themselves
Yeah.
and having that pressure, but also that trade was going on, and people over there were
Hmm.
getting goods as well. So it was, that expansion was a great thing, um, until
Until it wasn't.
until it wasn't, and then everything went to.
Well, that's where a lot of their surplus population went because, as I said, what they did when the Highland clearances was they would just, I mean, you didn't own the house that you lived in. You were a tenant farmer, meaning you raised crops, and the majority of them went to the lord or the laird, and you subsisted on what was left. Well, when they came along and moved you and your goods out of your house, a lot of them end up down on the seashore and became kelpers and, harvesting kelp. And a great percentage of them jumped on ships and headed over.
Yeah,
A good percentage of them just died in place. They had nowhere to go and no way to get anywhere.
yeah,
But a good percentage of them joined the military just to have somewhere to go, to have food and clothing, you know.
yes,
So y- that's why so many. I mean, when you think about, well, the British are coming, the British are coming. The overwhelming majority of the redcoats that fought were not actually English; they were Scottish, Irish, or a combination of the three.
yeah,
Cornish, Welsh.
yeah. There were different groups within the Isles.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah. Well, let me say this before we
Yeah, we need to wrap
head.
up.
Yeah, before we head in there, I gotta share this with you because I'll forget, because this one's a pretty interesting one. 2 weeks ago or a week and a half ago, a
Mhm.
guy in the Canary Islands sent me my mother's grandfather would be my
Mhm.
great grandfather. Wait, let me get this straight. No, my second great grandfather. It
Okay.
was their great grandfather, so it's my
Okay.
second great grandfather. Um, the, a guy from the Canary Islands that I had spoken with a long time ago
Mhm.
lives there.
Mhm.
He actually has a Northwestern European surname because his
Mhm.
family converged in the 20th century
Mhm.
there. So he's bilingual, except that
Mhm.
he grew up in the Canary Islands, but has half British, half Canary
Yeah.
Island. He sent me all that information about my second great grandfather and where he was born, the baptism, all sorts of data. Okay, well, this past week he said, I'm gonna go back to the church record place, and let me see if I can dig something else, because he does that. That's what he
Mhm.
enjoys. He's
Mhm.
been very kind to me, and I have no way of. I mean, it's just, so he went and he sent me, because there was a mystery. Why
Mhm.
can't I find the next generations and such? And the
Mhm.
reason why I couldn't find, he found it for some reason. Talking about names to bring it all in a circle. My second great grandfather's name was Francisco Hernandez Lugo.
Mhm.
Hernandez is his paternal, Lugo is his maternal.
Okay.
His father, in his record, is Toribio, or Tiberius.
Mhm.
Tiberius, in English, it would be Tiberius. Hernandez Rodriguez.
Okay.
In the records from the other week,
Mhm.
but he said he couldn't find his father's birth records,
Mhm.
and this week he found them.
Mhm.
And for some reason, we don't know why, in his records, his parents' records, and his grandparents' records, he's not Tiberius Hernandez. He's Tiberius Ventura, and there
Hmm.
is no reason that we can find, because we know who his parents and parents, for some reason, from him, in other words, my second great grandfather's father, my third
Mhm.
great grandfather, from him to his son, and I have both their baptisms, so they're both. It's all in
Mhm.
the family, so it's not some weird thing. In the
Yeah.
at least documentary wise, the name of his father changed in the baptism of his son, but prior to that, it's Ventura for 3 generations back.
Hmm.
So I don't know. So Hernandez, that goes down into my grandmother's line and then through my mom to me.
Mhm.
So it's all maternal down into that side.
Yeah.
Hernandez and all my cousins
Mhm.
in practically in practicality in actuality
Mhm.
shouldn't necessarily be, unless there's something that they chose to, because they did weird things back then.
Mhm.
Um, they might take one from the grandfather or some weird thing.
Yeah.
I don't know. They should all be freaking. They should all be Venturas. So in reality, if we go by that logic
Mhm.
of documented logic, I
Mhm.
have it with the folios and
Mhm.
and all the numbers and stuff. So it's there.
Mhm.
My grandmother, instead of being Jimenez Hernandez, should have been Jimenez Ventura,
Yeah.
and all our cousins
Mhm.
and all our uncles should actually, in theory, be, if we follow the line of succession of a surname,
Mhm.
Ventura.
So, but nobody knows why the surname was changed.
He said that I don't know why it changed. I tried to look and this and that, but all the names fit. In other words, he said, I thought maybe this. I tried to look with Hernandez, but couldn't find his father's records. But
Mhm.
I found a Ventura that had everything correct, and
Mhm.
all the names and grandfathers and such, everything connected. And this is not the only case. In the Canary Islands, some people were Portuguese, and Portuguese
Mhm.
will switch out. So, like, if you're Lindsay and your second surname is, Ventura,
Mhm.
your grandson, just because you have a Portuguese, the Portuguese will oftentimes just give the mother's name first and the father's name second. They do it like that.
Mhm.
And then if you go down 3 generations, your actual surname is gone. Well, it was never there because they keep switching it.
Yeah.
So, and I do have Portuguese. I can confirm that.
Yeah.
So I have Portuguese. So the question is it that situation? What is it? I don't know, but it's there.
Yeah.
So officially, Ventura. How weird? That's weird stuff.
It's like me finding out I'm a Gent.
Exactly.
Day, day Gent.
Exactly. So it's kind of one of those. I thought it was super. Well, it's
It's kind
pretty.
of freaky. Yeah.
Yeah, because it changes. I mean, a surname is very iconic,
Hmm. Yep.
and if they switch that out to you,
Hmm.
from you, you're like, what? Wait a second. I don't
Where'd
think
that come
so.
from?
Yeah. So go figure.
Hmm.
So yeah, I just wanted to share that one as a surname bit that we actually started with. So
Freaky
are we
stuff,
gonna?
man. Freaky stuff.
I'm telling you, dude.
Hmm.
So are we gonna land this puppy?
That sounds like it sounds like it's about time. It's been a little after over 2 hours.
Okay. So we go live every Tuesday, 9:30 Eastern, 6:30 Pacific Coast time here on the Trampled Underfoot podcast show on YouTube. We also have a Facebook page by the same name, as well as a page over on the interwebs, which is trampledunderfootpodcast.com. And you can catch past episodes there. We're also sponsored by.
Let me push the button. There's the button, Harneal Media. You know you want a website. We've been talking about this for coming up on 5 years now, y'all. We've been talking about this. Talk to Steve. Get over there, talk to Steve at Harneal Media. What have you got to lose? Only the amount of time it takes you to click that contact us link, enter your email address, and say, hey, Steve, I'd like to talk to you about a website. Click that send button. That's it. That's all you need. It just took me longer to tell you that, and it'll take you to do it. Believe me when I say he's competitively priced. Believe me when I say he's going to give you personalized service. And believe me when I say he's going to give you performance, not excuses. There's a link to Harneal Media in every video on this channel, and it's that way for a reason. So head on over and talk to Steve at Harneal Media. That's HARNEAL media.com, sponsor of Trampled Underfoot podcast.com.
Well, we thank you guys for hanging out. We hope you enjoyed it. We had a good time. Well, I'm speaking for myself. I hope you did as well. Nothing. Do the things that you enjoy. Enjoy it to the max, but do it safely. Don't do anything crazy
Oh,
unless,
come on.
well, okay, you can, as long as you're safe, but do it safely, whatever the heck it is. Jumping off bridges and well, let me not even suggest that. Put the little ticker tape banner, my ticker tape banner time, because I didn't say that. Um, yeah, do the things you love, but be safe, and we'll catch you here next week. And nothing. Peace.
Peace. Okay.